What's up, gangsters? It's time to get into part 3 of this oil paint rendering extravaganza. But before I do, let me answer a question that I had. It's now Friday afternoon. I started this on Tuesday, and I'm cranking through these pretty fast because honestly, I wanna get this project done, and I'm into the oil paint part of it, which is honestly always the most fun thing for me. And truthfully, doing these videos is kind of sucking the joy out of it for me because I can't. It's just not a natural. It's just not a natural flow for me, and I feel like the videos are straight up terrible. But I am trying to make it as useful for you guys as possible, and. I will try and answer questions that pop up in between episodes. And one of them was, what's the difference between thinner and mineral spirits? And that's a really good question because you see a lot of confusion about that. So the simplest way to answer it is with an analogy. Thinner is to mineral spirits as automobile is to pickup truck. I don't know any other way to say it. There's a ton of different kinds of thinners. But mineral spirits is a very specific type of paint thinner. And so that's why you'll see, like in SMCG, when somebody says something like, oh yeah, just use some paint thinner, the immediate response from a bunch of us is like, okay, which one? Because look, words matter because they're connected to chemistry, and chemistry definitely matters. It's a thing, and unfortunately, the paint manufacturers are like the worst culprits because you can totally go down to the local hardware store and buy a can of paint thinner, and you have no idea what's in it unless you read the label or find an MSDS for it. So it can be a real hassle, and I totally sympathize with the guy who asked that question. It's not a dumb question at all, and I'm happy to be able to answer that. So anyway, enough of my jaw flapping. Let's get back into this thing. All right, so to just kind of pick up with where I left off on the last one, this drop tank is nice and flatterson. So, and I think it looks good. I'm pretty happy with the effect there. And the only thing left that I want to do is put a little bit of a streak tailing off from the back end there. So that's gonna be coming up here pretty soon. The prop blades. So this is part of why this is so hard for me to do on camera, because here's the truth of what happens with this stuff. I come in, I do some oil work, I walk away. I come in later in the day or the next day and I look at it and I go, yeah, okay, all right, I kind of like it, but I want to do a little bit here and there. And I tinker with it and I poke at it and I obsess over it. And I will do that, 2 or 3 times. And that's exactly what's happened with these propeller blades. I just really, after I sprayed the GX113 on the application that you saw in the previous episode, I just didn't feel like it had enough contrast. And, it was close, but not bad. So this morning, what did I do? I started looking at it and poking at it, and I added another layer of oils and got it up to where I feel like it is much happier. Pleases me more. I don't look at it now and get a little twitch in my eyelid. There's nothing different. I'm not doing anything different each time. So it's not like you guys really missed out on anything by not seeing me perform the operation. It's just more of the same. And honestly, this is the way it goes with me. I do. I tweak it until I feel happy about it. And that's one of the great things about oils. They let you do that pretty much endlessly. All right, so let's just get into it. Let's see if we can build a streak right here, tailing off from this spigot or drain or whatever that is. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can do streaks. You can put a dot of material down and then run a brush across it that's got a little bit of mineral spirits on it. and just let it sort of form naturally from that dot. You can sort of paint the whole streak and then blend it in. I mean, it kind of depends on you know, what kind of streak you want, what you're after. But let's try the let's try that first method on this one. Just see what we get. I haven't done any streaks in probably close to a year, and I feel like streaking is honestly one of the toughest things to get right. So I fully expect to screw this up and have to do it 17 times. Anyway, I've got just a little bit of raw umber right here, and I'm just going to get just a little bit of that, and I'm going to put that right here in the area where I want the streak to begin. Not concerning myself with the shape of the dot at all, just want to deposit a little bit of paint there. That's really all I'm trying to do. Now, the selection of brush is, you know, is kind of important. But for this type of streak where I'm just doing one streak, it's not a really big deal. So let's just see. I want one that's relatively soft and flexible though. Let's just see what happens with the wisp. Normally I use this when I'm doing, when I want like multiple streaks coming off the same area, but we'll see how this works. I've dipped this in mineral spirits, and so it's really loaded up. It's got way more in it than it needs. So I'm going to wick some of that off. All right, and let's just see what happens. Not bad. Not a bad start. It's got good shape to it, and it's got that most important characteristic of streaks. It's straight and it tapers. I can't tell you how many times I see guys trying to make streaks and they're not straight or natural in the direction that the streaking should be taking place. Whether that's airflow or gravity or whatever it is, they have to be natural, or it's just one of those things where if it's not, if it's crooked, your brain's going to look at it and there's going to be a disconnect. So this isn't too bad. I'm not going to say it couldn't be better, but I think I could probably live with that. Now let's say we can see here that it's a little heavier sort of on one side there. All right. Let's say that we want to just even that out a little bit. This is where I might come in with the magic blender and just work it down a little bit until it's a little less pronounced. And now you can see that it has problems. The problem is that it's thicker towards the tail than it is at the front. And there's a little bit of a break right there where it joins the rest of that puddle. That doesn't work for me. Not happy with that. So probably I'm going to end up getting rid of it, but let's just see what happens if we keep sort of working it. Maybe by by working it, see there, I kind of get rid of it, and now I have just sort of this discoloration that tails off there, and that's not a bad thing. That's probably something that I need anyway. So let's try again. Okay, this time I put a little more paint there. Part of the problem with doing streaks is that, and this is why you want a brush that's relatively soft, is that when you introduce mineral spirits and you are working from the front of the streak and you repeatedly touching the brush to the front of it, you're just gradually wearing away the oil that you've got there, and that's why you'll get that sort of spot at the front that's not, that's lighter and it looks detached. Now, this is not a bad looking streak, but it's a little crooked. It does not tail off straight along the center line of the tank. Let me see if I can sort of fix that. Yeah, maybe. I find that more often than not, if they start crooked, it's better to just start over. I rarely am able to get one straightened out to my satisfaction. So there, that's a little bit, not too bad. I don't hate that. I'll leave it there, see what I think. And now we'll move on to doing some more streaks in a different area, because there's going to be a lot of them on this plane. All right, it's next day, and I have just now sat down at the bench to have another go at this OPR business. And first thing I always do when I come back to the bench is look at what I did the previous day and see if I'm still happy with it. And yes, I still feel pretty good about this streaking business. I think it is just fine. I'm cool with that, so I'm going to set that aside. I will probably end up putting another little bit of dull coat on that because even though it's technically not necessary, I'm just always paranoid that having bare oils is just, long-term not a good thing. It's fine. And like Mike Rinaldi doesn't put any on top of his. And again, I think it's fine, but that's just one of my personal things. But I'm going to wait because there will be one more thing that I'll do. I will probably do some speckling on the sides of these tanks because there's going to be some speckling on the belly, and I'll just seal all of that up after it's all done. All right, so, but there is more streaking to be done. I want to carry on with that. Last night I did, or after I did those streaks, I did these streaks. And just, to kind of get warmed up, this is a pretty common thing that you'll see in reference photos of the P40, where for whatever reason it has a tendency to spew, I guess, oil out of the variable pitch mechanism that's in the spinner, and you get that on some of them. It also has a tendency to be grimy and dirty behind that split in the sheet metal and not as much up here. So I'm going to work on that too, but I'm going to do the streaks first. Now here's the thing. These streaks go straight back, and you'll see that on some of them. But on others, you'll see the streaks have a bit of a twist. When you're looking at the prop from the front, it spins counterclockwise, and so what would happen then is the streaks would have a bit of a Coriolis effect to the right, like so. And I'm going to try and do that right now, but it may be a total fail. However, the first thing that I'm going to do is get something better than what I've got going on here to hold on to this, because I don't want to be finger fucking it the whole time I'm attempting to do this OPR on it. Okay, so here's what I've done is just cut myself a little piece of sprue and super glued that in there. There's a lot of room inside that spinner, but I'll be able to just bust that out of there when the time comes. But look at how clean the end of that little chunk of sprue is chopped off. Maybe you'll be able to see it. That's a little bit better. Very slick, and that is courtesy, here's a little Easter egg, of these Dispier nippers that I was sent recently. And these things are super sharp, probably even sharper than my Gundam Planet nippers. And you can see why, because look how thin the blade is there. very thin. Okay, where was I? I had a phone call. Anyway, you can see these actually were used before they were sent to me, and you can kind of see that the tip of them is a little bit mangled. You can see it right there. That's how delicate they are. And you're probably going, oh, well, you're not supposed to be cutting sprue with them either. Well, yeah, I treat that as horse shit. With any type of pliers or cutters, they have maximum leverage the closer you are to the pivot. So if you cut sprue and you put it all the way in like that, don't try cutting it out at the tip. You'll be just fine. You can slice like that. Sorry, I was off camera again, of course. Put it all the way back, as far back in the jaws as you can. You'll be fine. You can slice little skinny chunks of sprue off, no problem. But yeah, these have a thinner blade, not by much, but thinner and more delicate and therefore sharper, but also more easily damaged than my Gundam Planet version 1.0 nippers, which I have been using and abusing for more than 5 years now. And I cut sprue with these things all the time. These, yeah, well, they're sharper and more delicate. But yeah, anyway, sorry, that's a little bit of an aside there. Just thought you guys might be interested in seeing that. Anyway, so now that I've got that little stub stuck in there, I will use a pin vise and just tighten that, and I'll have a really nice way to hang on to it while I do my work. This is one of my favorite ways to hold stuff for painting. So, all that rigmarole out of the way, let's do some streaks. Okay, so once again, I've got some raw umber over here. I'm gonna just get a little bit of that on my brush, and I'm going to just apply it in some likely looking spots. You know, again, this is kind of hard to be random. Okay, but that's the idea there. All right. Now, yeah, I'll be honest, I don't know how to do a curved streak, and I fully expect this to be a fail. That is probably too much. And having them all be the same is going to be the challenge. Those are already not looking great. And then the application of some mineral spirits to sort of smooth it out is going to create yet another source of variability. But I'm going to get most of the mineral spirits off of this brush. These are a little hard to see because they are brown on red. Yeah, that's not going to work. Okay, so that's a fail. I'll just go ahead and wipe those off. Not a good start, but I didn't really expect to have a good start. I think that I'm probably going to just stick to the streaks being straight. I mean, they're not wrong that way. The other way is a little more interesting, but I think it's more than I'm going to try and attempt this time around.
I'm just going to be repeating this process. And sometimes just with the paint that you've got on your brush, you're good to go. You don't even need to pick up the one with the thinner on it.
But this is a tough thing because, again, I mean, they either have to be perfectly straight to the center line of the spinner, or they have to be obviously and purposefully curved. There can't be any in between. So I think those that I made there are pretty good, pretty straight. So I think I'll go with that. Now, the next thing that I'm going to want to do, though, is I don't want there to be any of the streak in front of that joint in the sheet metal. So I'm just going to take a little cotton bud here. I could use a brush too, but this is fine. And I'm going to just clean up just to make sure that there's a hard break right there. So there we go. Some streaking, some spinner streaking. All right, so that's good. I'm gonna just continue on and do a few more, and I'll show you when I'm done how they look. Okay, so I have added the rest of the streaks, and I really haven't done anything different. Just basically been applying a little dot of paint and then dragging it down the way that I demonstrated, and then if necessary, coming back with a brush that's got mineral spirits in it and using that to shape the streaks so that they have that really, straight direction, and they taper to a really nice sharp tip. And I think these are all pretty good. One of the things that's a challenge with something like this, though, is I want to work all the way around the spinner, and I want the streaks to have, a nice variation in length that looks random, the spacing to not be too regular. And I think I've done okay with that. Those right there look a little bit regularly spaced, but they're not too bad. I think I'm good with all this. But of course, that's what I think all the time when I'm at this point. And then I come back later and decide I'm not as good as I thought. So I think what I'm going to do is I want to add a little bit of action right in here, in between these streaks right here, that looks a little less calculated. So let me see if I can zoom in and get that on camera. Okay, so there we go. You can see what I'm saying. Those are just a little bit evenly distributed for my taste. When you look around at the rest of the spinner, there's some pretty good variation, and that's what I want. But then you get to, and that's not bad. There's pretty good variation there. Some of them are a little darker than others, but right there, they just look a bit unrandom. So let me see what I can do about that. I'm going to call that fine for now. I'll come back and look at it again later, but I feel like I'm at that point instinctively where I need to just stop messing with it and just let it be for a little bit. But if I like it, I'll lock those in with a little bit of dull coat. Well, I say dull coat like it's a generic thing, or like I'm actually using dull coat when I'm not. I'm using GX113 anyway, blah, blah, blah. So now, just because I want to and because it'll be fun, I'm going to work on this stain around this hatch right here. And so I've got a little bit of some black and some raw umber sort of blended up over here on my palette, and I'm going to get a little bit of that on my brush. And this is one of those situations where you want the paint to be pretty creamy, because what I'm going to do is I am going to just actually paint some on here. And again, I want to stay very specifically on the outside of the line there. And I know this probably looks a little crazy because it's going on so thick and you're like, what? But don't worry. So I'm going to paint right up to the line there. And I'll come back and fix where I'm kind of going outside of that. Okay, so again, just creating a stain there, all right? Now that obviously is a lot of paint. I don't intend to leave all of that there, but the first thing that I need to do is clean up where it is supposed to have a break in the pattern there, where it's totally not supposed to be. So first thing I'm going to do is come back with this brush where I've got a little bit of mineral spirits on it. And I'm going to just wash away that little bit where I crossed over right there. All right. So that's pretty good. Okay. Now, let me get the big soft magic blender. And let's just start blending. You can see how much of that is coming off just blending it dry. And I had a little bit of mineral spirits on that brush, which is why it's sticking as much as it is. So this is the thing with oils. How they behave is just so sensitive to the tools you're using, the paint itself, the surface that you're going on, the amount of mineral spirits. And I know you're probably looking at that thinking, man, that looks gross. It's terrible. So, and it's too much, but that's okay. Because now I'm going to come in here with this brush that has more mineral spirits on it, and I'm going to just work that around a little bit. And again, if it looks horrible to the point where I need to get rid of all of it, that's not a big deal. It's easy to do. So that's a little bit better. Let's see what happens when we come back and blend that. Again, see, now it starts to become a lot more subtle, but it's still not what I want. Still not happy with it. It's a little heavy right here at the top. And I don't want it to have any kind of a hard edge. Just want it to be a subtle discoloration, so that's starting to get better. This brush still has mineral spirits in it, and it doesn't take much. I mean, like, it's just a whiff is all that's got to be in there to start to affect the paint. And I want that to just really tail out there and fade out. That's starting to make me a little happier. I'm going to come back and work on the left-hand side of the line right there. I really want a crisp division, because that's the key element in telling the story, so that when people look at that, they go, oh, I get it. The door's up, and there's dudes dicking around there and making a mess with their nasty little man paws. All right, so that's had a minute to just settle there. Just come back, work it, and it's got a pretty good look to it. But I don't know if you guys can see down below the star where I drug a bunch of paint. I have a big unintentional streak down there, which I definitely don't want. So that's not a big deal. I'm gonna just go back to this brush that I'm using to clean with. Well, actually, I want something that'll be a little absorbent first, so I'm just gonna get Q-tip with some mineral spirits on it and just come right under there, and I'm gonna just I want to get rid of that completely. And you guys can hear I'm having to do a little bit of scrubbing because this is GX113. It is super flat. But you can see that oil paint came off. It's not a problem, and I don't have the issue that I had there. Now, what I want to do is clean up a little bit around that bottom point of the star. So I'm going back to my cleaning brush, cleaning, blending, whatever you want to call it. And I like the way that I've got some discoloration in the blue there as well. I just don't want that much. So down here, just gonna work on getting rid of some of that. I think I'm in pretty good shape there. That's pretty dramatic, but that's okay, because this is, sometimes you have to be a little melodramatic again to effectively tell the story. And I really need to have some discoloration in the blue there as well. I think that's pretty good. That looks like grimy hands at work. Okay, so a little bit about paint consistency. You'll notice with oils that when they start to get stiff and you start trying to brush them on, that they will get a little clumpy, and you'll get these little, like this right here, okay, in this area, you can see how it's sort of clumpy and it doesn't spread and blend evenly. So what you want ideally is, like, this is pretty fresh out of the tube right here, and well, actually that's not fresh at all. That's pretty dry. It's too dry. But I grabbed a little bit of mineral spirits here and I blended this around, and you can see sort of that creamy consistency that it's got right there. And you can see how when you smear it on the paper, see how it leaves a very solid patch of paint, no clumps, nothing like that. That is the ideal consistency for painting on stains, or the basis for a stain, like I'm gonna do right here. Okay, so see these little round things. I'm not really sure what they do. It's about the guns. There's one on top of each of the guns, and in the few reference photos that I have that show this area very well, there's typically there's typically something going on around those. Some kind of smut, some kind of discoloration, and I think that this black brown kind of thing is as good a guess as any. And so now here we come with the magic blender brush, and you can see how that starts to turn into a pretty nice and dark stain with a relatively hard edge. Let me change the angle of the camera here. So it's a little different from from how it would look if you were using a brush that was loaded with mineral spirits to do the blending. It's a little bit more dense, it's got a little bit more shape to it, and it adds variety and interest. And I like that. I'm going to leave those just like that for the time being and see what I think. I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite wing. Okay, so there we go. I've done the same thing. I've blended them in a little bit with this big fat magic blender brush, and I think those look pretty cool, so I'm going to just leave those be for now. Okay, while I'm in this area, I want to go ahead and add some staining around these doors themselves, but I don't want it to be quite as dramatic as that is. So I'm just going to take this brush that's already got a bunch of this paint in it. I'm going to just dunk it over in here in the mineral spirits. I'm going to get most of that paint off of there, and I'm going to just start working my way around here and kind of, again, going on the perimeter. This is something that I want to be more subtle. So I'm going to just work my way around that, and then we'll let it, and this is where I'm also taking advantage of the properties of mineral spirits and that tendency to flow and do cool stuff. And we'll just kind of let that, I don't want that big hair in the middle there. That's not a naturally occurring thing. I hate that. Those little hairs are the bane of my existence. But yeah, they are what they are. And I'm just going to use this brush to scoop it out of there. There we go. Nothing wrong with that. All right. And spin it around and do the same thing over here on this side. Okay, so right here in this area where I've got it over on into that white of the star, I don't really want it to be quite that dramatic. So, and what you don't ever want are hard edges, and this is where doing some more work with a brush that's just got mineral spirits in it pays off. So this is, this is getting happier, getting some variation in there. Kind of letting it coalesce around that panel line. That looks pretty good. Again, you have to always remember that it always looks more dramatic when it's wet. So when this starts to dry out, it's not going to be all that you're seeing here. And normally, like when you're doing panel line washes and things, tide marks are not your friend. But when you're doing this kind of work, they very much can be. All right, so let's whip back over here and see what's happening on this side now that the mineral spirits has had a chance to flash off. So this is a little bit too much, right? Like I don't really want these areas where I've got the kind of thick concentrations. That just doesn't look, that doesn't look natural. Sometimes you can blend those away with the big magic blender. If not, then a little bit of mineral spirits work will get you there. So again, I'm just coming back with this little brush and just working it. Just want to make sure that I don't have any hard edges on this type of staining. Sometimes hard edges are exactly what you do want. There are situations where they make sense, but this is not one of them. I just want this to look like, randomly soft staining. Okay, so let's let that settle up, see what it does, and let's go back over to the other side and see where we are. See, this came out a lot more subtle because at that point I had less paint in the brush and it just didn't collect in the same way that it did on the starboard side, and this is pretty good. Just a few areas here where I'm going to soften that up. So back over here now, you can see that the mineral spirits have flashed off, and you can see kind of again what you're working with, and just continue to kind of tune it up. Every now and then you go and dip the brush back into the mineral spirits. Come back. Work a little bit more. Okay, I think that's at the point where I want to stop and just let it be happy for a little while and then come back again later and see what I think. Okay, I could not resist doing some speckling because I've got some great material right here ready for it, and these are the kind of areas where I want some. Anywhere basically where guys are walking with things that might drip or splatter or whatever, but in particular right here where the fuel filler is, I wanted some speckles to reflect some dripping kind of thing going on. You can kind of see that right there. So let's do that. Okay, so with speckles, I mean, it's just, you want it to be random, and it's fun, but it's also kind of challenging because so much of it depends on it. I mean, it's all about how much paint and mineral spirits is involved and what kind of brush you use. So I've got just this junky old brush. What I'm doing is going over and dipping it in the mineral spirits, then coming and getting into this area where I was working from before and just loading the brush up. And don't be afraid, as you can see I've been doing here, to practice. And they're always going to look more dramatic when they're wet, just like I was saying before. So, if they don't look right when you first do them, no big deal. But basically then you just need something to use as kind of your tool, and be gentle Because as you can see, they can come out in a big hurry and you might end up with more than you want. So, do a few, let them dry, and you can see how much of those are disappearing just while we're sitting here talking about it. So you can do more than you might think you really need, and then come back and, if you get somewhere you don't want them, like I have some clear back here on the back. I don't want those. Those don't need to be back there. I mean, these aircraft got dirty, but that doesn't mean we have to just get completely out of hand, right? So that's where the mineral spirits and the Q-tip shows up again real quick. You can see right back here. I mean, those aren't wrong. I just don't want them. They just say more about uncontrolled weathering than they do about any particular story. So I'm going to just go back there and get rid of those. Partly because I also have other plans for that area that I don't want to get into with a bunch of uncontrolled speckles. And I think I've got more. I mean, these are okay. I think I'll leave those there for now. These kind of around here in this area, not too bad. I don't really want anything over here. So you just kind of have to be looking around when you do speckling to make sure that you didn't get a bunch where you didn't want it. But I think I can live with that. That looks pretty cool because, again, it's concentrated around the work area. Over here, not really the work area. Over here, not as much the work area. So again, just kind of keeping it where it helps you tell the story and not, letting it get out of hand. That's part of the key to any weathering technique. Okay, so there you go. We're 3 episodes in. Don't know how many it's going to take, but I appreciate you watching, if you have stayed tuned so far. Anyway, as always, much love.